Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse Pod. It's February, so happy February to everyone. Hopefully, everyone listened to the Joel Porter special last week. A great chat with the club legend, who a lot of people would put in their ball-time 11, judging by the comments under the Pulse post on Christmas Day, his birthday, of course. So if you haven't listened to that, it's still up on all available platforms. Joining me today, we have the Hartlepool United writer from the Hartlepool Mail, Robbie Stelling. Hello, Robbie. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Jack. You've really gone from a one superstar to another here, haven't you? With Porter to Stelling. Thanks for having me on.
I said that he was the writer of his own introductions. You generally have written your own introduction there, I think. But yeah, now there's been a few things this week to get into. Now, funnily enough, I was thinking of giving this weekend a miss because I'm off to London this weekend, partly to go to the Sutton game, which I'm looking forward to. But things have happened at the start of the week, and it seems prudent to talk about them this week. And it's nice to have someone who hopefully will be in the know about these things as well joining me today. So, Robbie, firstly, we'll go in chronological order. So on Monday, the video with Lenny Lawrence came out. And it was quite unexpected, really, wasn't it? Because there wasn't really a fanfare about the announcement that he made that Anthony Limbrick would be taken over from him, effective immediately, of course. And it did just sort of come at the end of the video, and he has spoken in the past that that was the plan going forward, that he would step back, Limbrick would come in. But did you expect it to happen so soon?
No, I didn't. I think the manner of the announcement, that's sort of Lenny Lawrence to a T. He is understated. Yeah, he's naturally a calm presence, and I think that's one of the reasons he's been so successful for so long. I think when you think back to sort of old school managers per se, you expect them to be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more confrontational. But Lenny Lawrence is really a sort of calm and composed presence. I think man management is certainly one of his strengths, and obviously when he replaced Darren Sarll back in October, I think that was a really important facet because he was able to take some of the pressure off the players and get them playing again. And I think in general, he's done a really good job. Obviously, 8 draws from 16 National League games. Clearly, that's too many, and that's a big frustration. As Lenny said in that video, imagine if they'd won even just a couple of those. I mean, you think back to the Woking game when they played an hour with a man advantage. I mean, you look at the Wealdstone and the Braintree games. They were probably games that Pools had earmarked for 3 points potentially. So that was certainly a frustration. I think, like you say, Jack, it felt inevitable that it would happen at some point. I think most people would have said that the summer seemed like the natural time for it to happen. I mean, from the moment really that Limbrick was appointed as head coach, obviously at the same time as Lenny was appointed as manager on a permanent basis, I think most fans had the sense that Limbrick was his successor in waiting. He's obviously got managerial experience himself. He was in charge of Woking. He was in charge of the New Saints in Wales, won a title there, played European football, and he had a spell in Gibraltar in charge of Manchester 62. Of course, he's got an interesting coaching background, working in the academies of the likes of Southampton, West Ham, Peterborough. And I think if you look at the move from Peterborough's academy, where he was at the time, to the role of Hartlepool head coach, I'm not 100% sure he would have made that move unless he had some sort of assurance that he was probably going to be the man to succeed Lawrence when the time came. But the summer seemed like the natural time to do it, didn't it? You think that would give Limbrick the time to bed in, work out what direction he wanted the club to go and what type of players he wants to recruit. And of course, as we well know as Pools fans, that is incredibly important. And where we stand now, Pools are very much still in with a chance of the playoffs. Obviously, it's starting to look more and more like an uphill battle. They're probably going to have to win maybe 9 or 10 of their last 17 games. That's going to be really difficult. Obviously, they've got 3 home games coming up. They might be targeting those 3 games for maximum points. And all of a sudden, the picture would start to look a little bit more favourable. As we were just saying before we came on air, Jack, there's a lot of teams vying for probably 1 or 2 positions. It's probably only sixth or seventh that the teams can really hope for. It's incredibly competitive. It's probably more competitive a National League than we've seen for a few seasons. Obviously, when we've had one team really run away with the division. But there are a lot of teams in and around them with games in hand. Rochdale have got four, as you said, Altrincham, Halifax. They're all teams with games in hand. Of course, a number of those team pools still have to play in the run-in, so potentially pools could take 3 points off them, and again, then the picture would start to look a little bit different. But I think most fans would agree that pools have started to lose a little bit of momentum of late. So I wonder if this change is made on the one hand with an eye on the future. I think Limbrick is clearly the man for the long term, and there are definitely suggestions that pools are starting to plan for the long term. You look at the likes of the signings of Jamie Miley and Sam Falarin. They're both younger players. Pools have a pretty old squad by the standards of the National League. A number of players over 30. Nicky Featherstone, of course, 36. Gary Medina and Luke Waterfall, 34. And then a number of players in their early 30s as well. So it's important that they are showing the signs of planning for the long term. Adam Smith and Tom Park sign new contracts as well, because inevitably there's a fairly high turnover of players in the summer, especially at National League level. So that can be difficult. But I think it's important that pools don't lose sight of the here and now, and perhaps the decision to swap places, really, as seems to be the case with Limbrick now taking charge and Lenny taking a step back to be a number two or an assistant or whatever. Perhaps pools do need a little bit of a re-energize, because after that fantastic win over Oldham on New Year's Day, when I think a lot of people were hoping that was going to be used as a launch pad from which to mount their assault on the playoffs, pools have really started to lose momentum. Okay, they had the 18-day break. A lot of teams had a similar break, but it certainly wasn't ideal, especially given what went on during that time with the training ground bust up. Lenny Lawrence then had to fend a lot of difficult questions. Whether that had an impact in-house or not, we don't really know. But what we do know is that they were pretty disappointing at Wealdstone. They were very disappointing against 10-man Woking, failed to break them down despite having a man advantage for more than an hour. They were completely outplayed by National League leaders Barnet. Obviously, no disgrace in that, but I think the manner of the defeat was really disappointing. Pools was so passive and to be honest, really rarely laid a glove on Barnet. And had it not been for the heroics of Adam Smith and some poor finishing, then probably the scoreline could have been a lot worse. And Braintree, well, Lenny Lawrence was left scratching his head up that after Pools missed a host of chances, they obviously hit the woodwork 3 times. And Adam Campbell, Manny Disarue, and Luke Waterfall, Reyes Cleary, they all went close. The fact is that it took a 96th minute equaliser from debutant Jamie Miley to salvage a point. And again, that was a disappointing result. I think Limbrick is a really impressive coach. I think he's a really impressive man as well. He has a sort of personal aura and charisma about him that I think players will respect. He doesn't necessarily have to shout the loudest, although I think looking at his interactions with some of the fourth officials since he's been appointed, they might disagree with that. But he has that sort of natural charisma that I think players will respect. He's got a lot of good ideas about coaching and football, and I think he's got a clear plan for how he wants Pools to move forward. So in the short term, I think Pools certainly won't have given up hope of the playoffs, but I would also say that it's by no means playoffs or bust. I think Limbrick is the man to take charge of Pools next season, whether this season ends in the playoffs or whether it rather fizzles out. I think he is certainly the right man, and I think most fans will want a bit of managerial stability. I haven't even been at the Hartlepool Mail for a year. This is going to be my fourth permanent manager, 16 permanent managers in the last decade. That's clearly not a sign that things are as you would ideally like them to be. Only a couple of those managers have lasted more than 12 months in the job. So I think it's important that Pools invest into a longer term project, but certainly for the remainder of this campaign, there's obviously a clear focus on hopefully trying to sneak into the playoffs, no matter how difficult a task that may be starting to look like it's going to be.
Yeah, there's some good points there. I mean, you spoke there. I mean, if we look at the results first of all, the results that we've had recently,
Mm.
you mentioned Wealdstone, Woking, and Braintree are the last three that we've had. They've all finished 1-1. They've all been against teams that you would expect Pools to beat. No disrespect to those teams, but there were certainly games you were looking at and you were thinking, if we get 3 points a year, it's good. It keeps us going, and they are 3 points that you would expect to get. I think Barnet was in that run as well, wasn't it? And as you say, we were completely outplayed. But just out of interest, when you saw the team sheet for the Barnet games, there was a lot of changes in that, considering if you ignore the Wealdstone game, we had that massive break, as you stated. Were you surprised at that team sheet that he'd rotated so much?
Yeah, I was very surprised. I wasn't necessarily surprised that there was rotation. I mean, as I said, Pools have a generally older squad. They're obviously looking to bring in some young blood. They've tried to do that in January, and I felt there have been some heavy legs of late. I mean, if you look at someone like Nicky Featherstone, most people probably expected him to play a less significant role on the pitch than what he has done. I think he's only missed two National League games. They were the first two National League games of the season under Darren Sung. And okay, he was rested on Tuesday night when Pools played Barnet. So I wasn't necessarily surprised that four changes. It wasn't like it was a complete overhaul, but I think the changes that Lanning Lawrence made was probably what surprised me the most. I think setting up with three defensive midfielders, when the first thing I saw when I saw that team sheet was to think, I'm not sure that sends the right message. You're clearly setting your stall out to play a certain way. I understand why Pools did that. They obviously frustrated Barnet in the reverse fixture back in November with a really compact, well organised display. Okay, they rode their luck at times, but I think they made it far too easy for Barnet to play their own game. Okay, you're away from home, you're against the National League leaders. I think you're probably going to accept that Barnet are going to have more of the ball. Pools are not a side that tend to really relish having lots of possession. I mean, you look at the Woking game, it felt at times like they didn't really know what to do with it. They certainly perhaps lack someone in midfield capable of playing that killer pass, particularly now Anthony Mancini is out injured. Jamie Miley, I think, is someone that maybe will have more of an eye for that. So that's going to hopefully be a positive. I think if you look at successful Pools teams in recent years, to be honest, Jack, one of the most important things, especially at home, I appreciate they were a long way from home when they played Barnet. But successful teams, they play on the front foot, they impose themselves on the game. I think that fans, particularly in the Northeast, obviously as a southerner myself who's moved to the Northeast for football, the fans in this part of the country, more than anywhere else, they demand blood, sweat, and tears. They demand that their players will run through brick walls for the team, and they want to see attacking front foot football. And I think probably the main criticism of Lennon Lawrence, and I certainly think that some of that is a little bit harsh. I think he's done a really good job, bearing in mind the squad that he inherited at the time that was so low on confidence, really out of ideas, and sliding down the National League table at an alarming rate. But I think probably if you look at his team selections, that one against Barnet was the one that he got wrong. Fine, make changes, but I think it's all well and good being compact and resolute and well organised, but you've got to have an outlet and an outball. Okay, they had Reyes Cleary and Luke Charm on either side of Manny Disaruri, but there were times when Manny Disaruri was so isolated. There was maybe one player within 20, 30 yards of him, and that's obviously going to make things really difficult. I had the same complaint actually against Braintree from set pieces. Pools put all 10 outfield players back to defend set pieces. So even if you deal with the initial threat, inevitably you're going to have to deal with another ball into your box. I think it's important that Pools are a little bit more positive, a little bit more proactive at times, because I know that fans often complain about, as you alluded to, actually, it feels like these are teams that Pools should be beating, your Wealdstones, your Wokings, your Braintrees. And you're exactly right, because Pools are a big team at this level. They've obviously got a proud history of being in the Football League. But as we found out, there's no divine right to go and beat teams like that. You've got to assert yourself on the game. You've got to take the game to the opposition more than Pools perhaps have done it in recent weeks. I think looking at the team sheet that Lenny Lawrence named against Barnet, it felt to me like there was really only one outcome. And yes, they dug in, they were resolute, they rode their luck at times, and they were difficult to play through on occasion, but it was almost like attack versus defense at times. And I don't think you can get away with playing three defensive midfielders, even if you're away from home against the league leaders. I think that was probably one occasion where Lanning Lawrence got his team selection a bit wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting that midfield that you speak of there was Hunter, Sharon, and Sloggett, wasn't it? Greg
Hmm.
Sloggett, who hasn't had that much game time, in fairness to him. I mean, on our ratings episode a few weeks ago, when myself and Adam were going through, and he gave Greg Sloggett a 1.
Mm,
And that was as much to do with the fact he barely played and he wasn't
yeah.
particularly, involved in the squad. But when he had played, he didn't impress at all. I think I gave him a 3. I think I criticised Adam for that at the time, and then after Barnet, which I watched from home on the laptop, I messaged Adam and said, I think I was a bit harsh on you for giving Slogger a 1 because I didn't
Mm,
think that midfield worked together at all, as you say. And the point you make about the possession as well. Limbrick has shown in the past at Walking and at other clubs that you've mentioned, he's very much a front foot. He's very much a
yeah.
possession-based manager. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, quite frankly. And you mentioned Jamie Miley there as well. You've also got Reyes Cleary, Sam Follering, who hasn't played that much to be fair. We'll come on to him in a minute. But the new personnel, optimistic from what you've seen of them so far. Obviously, you've been to the games, you've seen them live.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think the first thing to say is it was a positive move from the club to see that there is still that intent to add to the squad and strengthen the squad. Okay, there were a couple of outgoings, yes, Kazenga Lualua and Matthew Bondswell both left, so potentially there was a little bit of extra wiggle room. But as Lenny Lawrence said, funds were made available, and that's got to be a positive sign. It potentially, it felt like at some stages in January, especially after the injuries to Gray and Mancini and the trip to Wealdstone, when I think that was maybe the most disappointing Pools performance of the season because actually they were dominated, especially in the second half. I was definitely fearing that the season could potentially fizzle out. So it was really pleasing that Pools made some new signings. I think another thing that was pleasing is they clearly identified areas where they needed to
That's true.
strengthen. I think if you look at the recruitment at times over the last few years, not always, but at times, it's almost felt a bit haphazard at best. I mean, completely random. At other times, almost who's available. Let's try and get this person, that person, even if they're clearly a square peg in a round hole. It was obvious that Pools needed more pace in the side. The loss of Joe Gray, okay, I think that was something Pools had a little bit of time to prepare for. I saw Joe in November after the York game, and I know he was struggling. That's one of those things that simply had to get sorted. It was only going to get worse until it was operated on. It was just unfortunate timing that they lost Joe at the same time as they lost Anthony Mancini, who is obviously so talented but so temperamental physically, and it felt like an even more bitter blow having watched him against Oldham when he was so impressive. Obviously
He was
scored,
excellent.
yeah, scored the winning goal, and one of the first times really this season, although he's certainly shown signs that he's getting back to the player that we know he can be. One of the first times when you really thought potentially he's going to be able to rediscover that form, hit the same heights that he hit at the very start of his Pools career when he briefly became one of the hottest properties in the National League. Was fantastic for 6 weeks back in August. So that was a real double blow because you've lost Gray's pace. I think he's one of the few players in the squad who has that willingness to get on the shoulder and run in behind. In part, he's able to do that because of his pace. And obviously, Mancini is one of the few players who's capable of playing a killer pass. He's got that inventiveness, he's got that creativity, he's got that flair. He's a player that can produce something out of nothing, which perhaps Pools don't necessarily have. And so it was pleasing to see in terms of Cleary and Folarin, they certainly needed more pace out wide. And I think to complement that pace, they probably did need a different element in midfield. I mean, they've got 6 central midfielders on their books now, but if you look at Sharon, who I think has been absolutely excellent this season, arguably my player of the season, Soggett, Hunter, and Kieran Wallace, who obviously hasn't made a senior appearance this season, they're all players more renowned for their destructive qualities and their ball playing prowess. Nicky Featherstone, of course, we know is a really talented technician. He's clearly not getting any younger, and I think it's difficult for him to shoulder all the weight of responsibility. So to have someone like Jamie Manley, another ball player in the squad, to link midfield and attack, because I think too often there's probably been a little bit of a lack of a link. Nowhere was that more apparent than the Barnet game when there was a massive gap in between the midfield and the front three. And I've been impressed with all three of them in part so far. Obviously, we haven't seen much of Miley. He's going to take time to adapt to the National League. He's obviously had almost a decade at Newcastle, had a loan spell at Newport, which wasn't particularly successful, only played 8 times, albeit he was injured. He's quite slight in stature, but I think he will be hoping that his technical prowess means that he can be a step ahead of a lot of his opponents at this level. Of course, he's going to have to contend with the fact that the pitches at the National League are a pretty distinct remove from probably what he's been used to at Newcastle, but he looked like he adapted really well on Saturday, grew into the game, moved the ball nicely, nothing overwhelmingly fancy, but just got the ball and gave it, kept pools ticking over. I think that's really important. One lovely through ball, and then of course took his goal really well. Probably not been signed for his goals, but clearly very capable technically, and he showed that with a really cool finish in difficult circumstances late on. Reyes Cleary, I think, has probably caught the eye the most of the three new signings so far. He's obviously played the most of the three new signings. Bit of a diamond in the rough, but certainly got raw pace and a willingness to take on his opposition fullback. I think we saw that a lot on Saturday. He'll be disappointed he didn't open his pools account, of course. Hit the woodwork twice, particularly the one in the first half when he went through 1-on-1 after good work from Gary Medine. He'll feel as though he should have scored, but that'll come. Again, he's still getting used to senior football. I think he certainly gives Pools a threat and he's capable of occupying fullbacks. And Sam Folarin obviously has really good experience with Harrogate. I think he's played 80 something games, scored against Pools New Year's Day 2023. A lot of Pools fans will remember that when he ran, felt like half the length of the field with about a 10-yard head start on our centre halves and still managed to score. Again, he's clearly got pace, as is sometimes the case with wingers at any level, not just National League level. It's about balancing that pace with picking the final pass and having that enough end product in the final third. I think that's something that he's still got to work on and develop. He's obviously only 24, so in some senses he's still one for the future. But again, he's also a player that can add something between now and the end of the season. I think he probably would say by his own admission, he hasn't come to pools quite as fit as he might have liked because he hasn't played that many games this season. Certainly of late, he was sort of an impact sub at Harrogate, and that can be difficult. But positive signs, I think, from all three of the new signings. Positive that Pools are showing signs, again, of planning for the future, and positive that they've identified where they need to strengthen and that they've moved to do that.
Yeah, I think the point about the midfield there, about Miley potentially being that difference, if you like, it's a bit of a
Yeah.
detriment, really, that Nicky Featherstone, and as much as Nicky Featherstone has been excellent this season, I don't think anyone will deny he's been one of the most consistent players in the squad. The fact that he is now getting on, for want of a better word, and he's still part of
Mm.
what many would consider the best three in midfield that we've got is looking a bit detrimental. So it's good to have that youth in there, and Jamie Marley should, as his finish proved on Saturday, should provide something a little bit different there as well. And as you say, with Rhys Cleary, with Sam Folarin out on the wing, we've mentioned on the podcast before about wingers. We haven't really had that much of an out and out pair of wingers, if you like, for quite a while, because we usually shove Joe Gray onto the left hand side, or
Mm.
we've had, I think, Luke Molineux and Nathan Thomas, I think, are the two main wingers that we've had in the last decade or so. You can't really sort of think of anyone else that's made that much of an impact. So it'll be good to see that. On the subject of Joe Gray as well, both he and Manny Desiree contracts are up at the end of the season. There was an interview, I can't remember if it was yourself, it might have been Rob Law at Radio Tees, who mentioned that the contract talks were ongoing. Has there been any
Mm.
progress on that? Because that was quite a while. That was at least a month ago, wasn't it? And I'm not saying that it had to be done instantly after that, because we know if you look at Liverpool, for example, in the Premier League, their contract sagas have taken forever with the three players there. But is there any headway on that? Is there anything sort of in the background that suggests there might be a positive conclusion to that?
No progress as far as I'm concerned, to be totally honest, Jack. I would expect that this is one of those sagas that is going to drag on. And I know all Pools fans will probably be thinking the longer it goes on, the closer we get towards the end of their contracts, potentially the greater likelihood of one or both of those players leaving seems to be. Obviously, the contract offers have been tabled. Pools can only do what they can do in that regard. And I don't think it's a huge surprise that either player has not immediately jumped to sign. They're obviously both going to be out of contract. They've obviously both been really good servants to the club. Joe's been at the club for a long time now, played more than 100 games, particularly the second half of last season. And this campaign, he's really established himself as a regular in the side. Still only a young man, got bags of potential, I think, and will certainly fancy that he's going to be a Football League player as he continues to develop. Manny D obviously had that brilliant season last season, 25 goals in all competitions. He's found things more difficult at times this campaign. He was a frustrated figure under Darren Sarll, wasn't he? Only 2 goals in his first 11 games and lost his place in the side, along with Joe Gray, and lost his place in the side ahead of that trip to Forest Green, and was on the bench again at the start of the when Pools played Sutton in that remarkable game when both Disraeli and Gray came on in the first half and turned and changed the game. Manny D became the first ever Pools player to score a hat trick after coming off the bench, and in many ways at the time that was sort of a direct affront to Darren Sarll, and he'd clearly got his team selection wrong in that regard. They're both massively important players, and they're clearly players that Pools will not want to lose. They've been among the first names on the team sheet for the last couple of seasons. I think it's going to be difficult, if I'm honest, Jack. I think potentially there is still time to not saying their minds are made up one way or the other, but I think there is still time to change their minds whichever way they're thinking between now and the end of the season. Pools have obviously made a change in the dugout now. There's a clear direction of how they're going to go. I think if Pools can finish the season strongly, even if they don't finish in the playoff places, then both men might well consider remaining at the Prestige Group Stadium for at least another season. Obviously, they both have really enjoyed their time here. Joe's developed as a player and as a man at Pools. Manny Disraeli has spent a lot of his career as a second choice striker. He's been used as a substitute a lot throughout his career and has been in the Football League before without necessarily scoring goals regularly. He obviously loves it at Pools. He's popular with the fans. He has in general been one of the first names on the team sheet. I think he played pretty much every game last season. I think he's played pretty much every game this season as well. I think there are pros and cons to both. I would imagine that both men will potentially leave it as late as possible because, of course, that gives them a bit of time to shop around. In truth, if an offer comes in from an ambitious Football League club, I don't think there's anything Pools can do to stand in either of their way. But if Pools can show that they are also ambitious, they are also keen to return to the Football League, then they might be able to convince Gray and Disarui, who are happy, settled, popular here in the Northeast, that this is the right place for them to be. Joe Gray's obviously got his whole career in front of him. If he doesn't accept a move in the summer, if he stays at Pools, there's no reason why he couldn't move on in a year's time, 2 years' time, whatever. He's got plenty of football still to be played. Manny Disarui is still only 29. He's certainly got 3, 4, 5 more years, but he may be wondering that if he doesn't move this summer, then is there going to be another Football League move around the corner in another 12 months' time? The decision for him might feel that this is potentially one of his final, if not his final, chance at getting another crack at the Football League. And it's a big if he feels that Pools do not match his ambition, that Pools are not going to be potentially pushing for playoffs, as we all hope they're going to be next season. I think if I'm being completely honest, I think it's 50-50 for both. And lots going to depend on what happens in the next 3 or 4 months. I know that seems like a really obvious thing to say, but it's going to depend what happens from a Pools perspective. Are Pools going to show the ambition that Gray and Disarui want to see, that's going to potentially compel them to put pen to paper on a new deal? And who is going to come looking around? Who is going to show that interest in both players? I think they'll be interested in Joe Gray, given his experience for his age. And I think they'll be interested in Manny Disarui, but he'll certainly be mindful of the fact that he will need to score a few goals probably between now and the end of the season, because he's obviously enduring a bit of a barren spell. And I would say, in his defense, how many chances has he really had during that spell? Often he has lacked service. I don't think Pools have got him into goal scoring positions nearly often enough. He had a couple of half chances and one good chance at Braintree, I have to say. He missed a header just before half time that he'll probably be slightly disappointed about, but he'll be pleased that he's back in those goal scoring positions. That's something Pools really need to do more of. So I think it's a saga, to be honest, Jack, that's going to drag on, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of fingernails bitten as the end of their contracts get nearer and nearer.
To be fair, a couple of things on that as well. With Joe Gray, first of all, John Phillips in the Mad Crowd. commenting on Facebook, on one of the Facebook groups, I should say, mentioning that when Joe Gray, and we assume he will play for Anthony Limbrick at some point when he returns from injury, it'll be the 10th Pools manager he's played under. If you include Anthony Sweeney when he was caretaker here as well.
Mhm.
And obviously he's only 21 years old. And to play for 10 managers in that time, I think he broke through when he was 16, didn't he? 16, 17. So that is a lot to go through for any player, but especially when you're so young and you're still developing and you're seeing so many different people come through the door. And secondly, for Joe Gray, because he is that age, if he does leave this summer on a free and someone obviously will take him, he's certainly talented enough to do that, there will be a tribunal, and obviously the fee will be paid because he's under the age. Is it 24? I think it's 23 or 24. There's a tribunal
Mm.
if you're under a certain age for development. So that'll be something that obviously could go wherever it goes, whether a fee's agreed or if it goes to the FA, etc. And obviously we've had problems with that before with Fulham, that
Yes.
Murphy saga, and I couldn't even tell you where he is now, to be fair, because he's never really been heard of again, which
Not at
is
Fulham, I don't think, but no,
no.
I
So
same as
grass
you.
isn't always greener and all that, as it were. And as with Manny Desiree, where you obviously mentioned there about his goal drought, he does. If he does move, you'd think he would have to sort of showcase himself, if you like, towards the end of the season, because if he doesn't score for the next 3 months, who's going to take a striker that's out of form in that respect? But yeah, as you say, we'll have to see how that goes. Moving on to the piece of news that's come out today, surrounding more the National League, but Pools have put out a statement in conjunction with the league as well about the three up campaign, three up, three down. That will be. It's something that people have talked about for a long time in terms of the National League having two promotion places, I should say, instead of three, as is the norm for the pyramid. I mean, I'm going to assume that it's something that you agree with because I don't think there's many people who would disagree with the three up, three down. But can you see, first of all, actually, it's worth pointing out that it's not very often that the clubs all agree with each other as well, and they agree with the league, because this does seem like a united front because all 72 clubs in the National League, the North and the South and the Premier, have all co-signed this and have all put the statement out, which is very rare for the National League because, as we all know, it's not exactly the most together of gatherings, shall we say. Um, but can you see this happening in the near future? It seems inevitable it will happen at some point, but can you see this happening sort of as the regulator comes in and as things progress?
Well, I think as Pools fans, Jack, we might have to start campaigning for about 12 up, to be honest.
That's a fair point,
But
actually. Yeah.
I think it will happen, actually. I think it will happen sooner rather than later. I think the pressure is really palpable now. It feels like, obviously, with the statement and all 72 clubs, as you say, in unison, it feels like it's an oncoming wave that is going to be very difficult to stop. I think if you look at the quality of the National League compared to League Two, and as Pools fans, we've got a really good idea of the quality. And I was going to say the difference in quality, but in truth, there's not a massive difference in quality. The National League is a hugely competitive league. I think from an outsider looking in, I remember when we first went into the National League, I think a lot of Pools fans probably didn't know quite what to expect. We probably had in our heads an idea of a load of part-time teams with broken down grounds playing on parks and bobbly pitches or whatever. And of course, it's really not like that at all. I think there's 15 former Football League clubs competing in the National League pyramid at the moment. And you've only got to look at the teams that win promotion out of the National League, how well they adapt to the Football League, as a sure sign that there is clearly an argument to be made to increase, have another promotion place. I mean, you look at the successor of Stockport, of course, under Dave Challoner. You look at the successor of Wrexham, albeit with their Hollywood backers. You look at how well Chesterfield have adapted. Even look at someone like Bromley, not a side necessarily with the richest of histories, the biggest of fan bases, the most impressive of budgets. They're 16th. They've been really, really competitive. And I think to counter that, obviously, if you're a League Two club that is dangerously close to the precipice, you are far more inclined to be against this, but I think there is even a case to be made that for the long-term health of some of those clubs, I think it's almost got to a stage where you look at a number of clubs that are struggling off the field as well as on the field. I think if you look at Morecambe, they've obviously just come out of a transfer embargo. They've had some real big issues. Carlisle have obviously got some issues of their own. It can be almost about being just the third worst in the league. And I think teams almost stagnate a little bit. I think that affects the long-term health of the club on and off the pitch. I think it also affects the quality of the league because teams are just trying to do the bare minimum with considerable financial constraints to survive. Whereas there are lots of clubs in the National League who are going hammer and tongs to try and win promotion. I mean, there are some really, really big clubs in the National League, and there are some not so big clubs who are really well run, who operate really, really well, who probably deserve a shot at the Football League. I mean, look at a team like Altrincham, look at someone like Solihull Moors, how well they seem to operate, even when they lose managers, even when they lose star players. They still manage to adapt and continue to be successful and competitive. I think there's a very, very strong case for it from both sides of the spectrum. Sometimes you look at someone like a Notts County or a Chesterfield. In many ways, the best thing to do for the long-term health of a club is to drop out of the league, have a reset, and come back. I realise that's really painful in the short term. We as Hartlepool United fans know that it's really, really painful in the short term. But I think the standards of the leagues now are so similar. You look at someone like Tamworth, 16th in the National League. Just 2 seasons ago, they were in the National League North, and the FA Cup run that they enjoyed. And not only that, the fact that they managed to push Premier League Tottenham Hotspurs right to the end, right to extra time in the FA Cup. There's clearly a really high standard. There are loads of players that go on and be successful at a much higher level. And I think it will benefit the health of both leagues because there's a number of clubs in and around the bottom end of League Two that have been there for some time now. And I think will either need to be kicked into gear, if you like, or maybe would benefit from having the opportunity to reset outside of the Football League. And there are so many clubs in the National League that are competing for obviously one automatic spot and one other promotion spot, and that is incredibly difficult. And I think if you look at the standards of the two leagues at the moment, that just simply isn't right. I think something's got to change, to be honest, Jack, for in the interest of the long-term health of a number of clubs, in the interest of the fairness and competitiveness of both League Two and the National League. And I think something will change. I think, as I say, the pressure is really growing. There's clearly a united front. It's going to be interesting to see what happens because clearly there's not going to be everyone in the Football League that agrees with that. But I think in the end, we're going to see change because the fact is that two teams at the moment are going to be relegated out of League Two every season, even if nothing changes. And in that sense, it's going to then be in their interest to have 3 up, 3 down because they're going to want to have the best possible chance of getting back into the Football League. So perhaps for those clubs lingering in the bottom half of League Two, that might be something to consider as well. And from a Pool's perspective, let's hope that we're probably not going to get 12 up, are we? But let's hope we can get 3 up and 3 down because that's obviously going to give Pools a better chance of being promoted. But that's not all it's about. We want to see healthy clubs. We want to see competitive leagues, and I think that 3 up, 3 down would certainly do that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're never going to get 12 up. That's a massive shame. Could have the full top half going up, which would be nice for us. But if you were to increase the automatic places to 2 and obviously still have the playoffs, that would then mean the playoffs would run down to 8 teams, which, assuming that they wouldn't change the playoffs, and I don't see why they would. It's
Mm,
interesting reading about what Mark Ives, the CEO of the National League, has been saying. A lot of his points share similarities, I should say, to what you've been saying there. He mentions about Wrexham and Stockport. He mentions Luton as well, which is a good point about
mm,
their going from the National League to the Premier League. I know they're back on the way down now, but the fact that they got from that point to go up, and that was a fairy tale story. He's mentioned Notts County, he mentioned Tamworth and their FA Cup, and mentioning as well that all except 2 of the clubs in the league are full-time clubs as well, which speaks to the standard of the league as well. Um, he mentioned something quite interesting as well that has been sort of bandied about before about a potential League Three. instead of like having the National League still, and about potentially moving into a League Three. And I mean, he sort of dismisses that actually because he does sort of say, well, we work well enough aside, so why would we combine? Which I think a lot of fans may sort of disagree with. But it's an interesting one, really. It's mentioned as well that they're hoping that it'll pass at the AGM this summer. They're hoping that the change will happen for next season. So it'll be interesting to see at the AGM whether that does happen, whether Rick Parry of the EFL does do that. And it's interesting as well. To be fair, the National League is trending on X at the moment as a result of the three up, three down, which is quite good, really, actually, because it doesn't get the publicity that it does sometimes higher up the pyramid. And an interesting comment as well from the chairman at Barnet. Oh, why is everyone's name so difficult to pronounce? Honestly, I need like those videos in the Premier League where commentators say, "Oh, look, they've given us a video of their pronunciations and all that." And it's Tony Cleanhouse, I think. Tony Clean. Oh, I'm not even trying. Either way,
Rather you, rather you than me, Jack.
yeah, it's the chairman of Barnet anyway. They've basically been asked about it because they are currently top. They're 4 points clear. I think they've played a game more, but they're looking good to go up. As we mentioned, they were excellent against us in January. And he said that he's all for it as well, even though obviously they may well go up and then they're in more danger of coming back down. But he said that he's happy to fight in a division with the fairness, meaning the fairness of three up, three down, which is very interesting. And funnily enough, the top result for the National League at the moment is someone called Jeff Stelling. Uh,
Oh no! Oh no!
yeah.
Never be good.
No, I mean, you can guess who you want, but basically, he's very much in favour of it. He does also point out that he is biased in the matter as well. I wonder why. But he does, to be fair, he does make the point that similar to you and similar to Ives and others, the teams that have promoted have gone on to do very well. It's very rare that a team comes straight back down to the National League. It's also very rare for a team that are relegated to go straight back up, which is partly due to the two up. But it is also a credit to the league itself and the clubs that are there who have, shall we say, done time in the league,
Yeah.
who have adapted to the league and they've basically they've found it difficult and they've had to reassess. As you mentioned as well about, going down to what's the word? To reassess, to recombine, if you like, and launch a better club from the ashes, if you like. It's interesting, really. I mean, it should happen. Whether it does happen this summer, we'll have to see, I suppose, because it's always going to be the argument that it's turkeys voting for Christmas in a
Yeah.
way.
Exactly.
So we'll see. I mean, it's like I said, there's a lot of comments as I'm scrolling down to say they're finally going for it. We'll see what happens. It'd be good to go. I mean, you've got bosses like Mickey Mellon and Jim McNulty and others who are also saying, it's ridiculous that clubs are effectively being stopped from going to the National League because of the very small door, shall we say. It's interesting, really. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully we'll come back to this next season. And it has been done, and I mean, hopefully we'll get into the playoffs and it won't matter anyway. But in which case, I'm sure Jeff will put a tweet out saying, I was joking in March, I was joking in February time, and
Yeah.
now that we're back in the EFL, we'll be fine.
Well,
And
he doesn't often speak sense, but I think he's right there.
oh, there'll be an argument in the house after that one. No, but looking ahead just to the short term future, we've mentioned briefly about Sutton. I mean, I'll be there, which is my first away game this season, which is a atrocity, quite frankly, given what's happened in previous seasons. But commitments stop me from getting out on a Saturday these days. But it should be an interesting one. We've got a very, let's say, poor record at Sutton. We've got a couple of decent results against them at home. We've had a few draws away from home, but on the main, we do tend to, if not lose, then certainly struggle at Sutton. Can you see any positives potentially?
Well, I think the fact that they've had a change in the dugout. Okay, it's not a new manager as such, but you never know what kind of reaction there's going to be. Presumably, there is going to be a response from the players. I think that obviously Anthony Limbrick will be keen to use the summer to really get his ideas across over the next 3 or 4 months. It's going to be interesting to see how he balances his natural instinct for attacking possession-based football with the footballing reality. Pools do have plenty of good footballers in the squad. Nicky Featherstone, Jamie Minley, we've touched on them. Both Joe Gray hopefully is going to be coming back soon enough. Anthony Mancini, Adam Campbell, there are good, capable footballers, but obviously a number of the players signed last summer were signed by Darren Sarll, who had certainly a different idea of how football should be played. He was obviously focused on making his side competitive, combative, robust, reliable, and obviously was pretty direct. So it's obviously Limbrick is inheriting a squad that is not his own, albeit I think the fact that he's been in and around the place for 3 months and made a really positive impression so far is only going to be a good thing. It's another long trip for Pools against another one of their playoff rivals, Sutton. Obviously, having had a bit of a mixed start, as you said, it's difficult to drop down from League Two to the National League. As Pools have found, the both times when we've been relegated, we've made pretty indifferent starts to our campaigns. They had a bit of a mixed start, but they look like they're hitting form at the right time. It feels like from a Pools perspective. They've played plenty of sides that are hitting form at the moment. Obviously, Woking have been in good form under Neil Ardley. Braintree now unbeaten in five as well. But I think, as we discussed earlier, I'd like to see Pools try and impose themselves on the game a little bit more. Okay, it's away from home. You've got to be pragmatic to an extent, but let's go and have a go. I think that would be a really welcome departure from perhaps some of the performances we've seen in recent weeks. That's one of the reasons probably why Pools have drawn so many games. They maybe lack well, certainly they lack a bit of cutting edge and clinicality, but I wonder if they lack a little bit in terms of the mentality to say we are going to go and try and win this game rather than just rest on their laurels. And having said all that, Jack, I'm now going to say I don't think a point would be a bad result at all on Saturday. Sutton, as I say, a bang in form. I think Pools obviously have lost a little bit of momentum. They're going to hope that Limbrick is going to be the man to re-energise them and revitalise their playoff push, certainly. I think all eyes really will be on the three home games that we've got to come. I think if you can get out of Sutton with a point, obviously three would be fantastic, but it's going to be a difficult game. Let's not pretend it's going to be anything other than that. It's going to be a really challenging game. Pools obviously won the reverse in remarkable fashion, but it's an entirely different proposition, as you say, going to Gander Green Lane. It's a long trip. That's difficult. It's another long trip. I feel like I've spent more time in my car than with any single human being over the last month or so, to be honest. Jack, but I think if Pools can get out of there with a result, they've then got three home games. They've got Maidenhead, Tamworth, Altrincham, two sides below them in the table. Maidenhead certainly threatened with relegation. Tamworth obviously far better at home, given that they're more used to their artificial service. They're far better at home than they are away from home, albeit they did a job on Pools in the FA Trophy in December. And then Altrincham, who are one of their direct playoff rivals. If Pools could pick up 7 or even 9 points from those three games, then that would be a massive step towards the playoffs. It would certainly signal that they are genuine playoff contenders and serious about finishing in the top 7 for the remainder of the campaign. It's going to be really interesting to see what Limbrick does with the side. I personally prefer a settled side. I know that that's what Lenny Lawrence tends to prefer, but he's chopped and changed a little bit in recent weeks. I'm never sure that that's a massively healthy thing to do. Obviously, his hand has been forced to an extent by injuries. They played 4-4-2 against Oldham. They played 4-4-2 against Wealdstone. Then they went back to one strike. Obviously, I know Gary Medine was injured for the game against Woking, but then they played those three defensive midfielders, as we discussed, against Barnet. Then they went back to the two up front on Saturday, which I didn't feel particularly worked, especially with the midfield of Adam Campbell and Nicky Featherstone. I think that was too lightweight, too easy to play through. I think if you're going to play a two in midfield, you've got to have a Sharon or a Hunter in there as one of your midfielders. So tactically, going to be interesting to see what he does. I think he tends to favour a 4-2-3-1. If you look at what he did at Woking and TNS, he tends to like to have that natural number 9 and then a number of attacking players in behind them. Whether he's had the time to really get his ideas and principles across. And of course, Lenny Lawrence is still going to be fairly heavily involved. And we've got Gavin Skelton, Carl Dickinson, Nicky Featherstone, Adam Smith, all part of the coaching staff in one form or another. But I think we'll see probably slight changes rather than a complete wholesale readjustment, especially given that Limbrick has been in and around the place for 3 months. But I've got plenty of faith in him that he's going to succeed. He's a great guy. As we know, you need to be more than a great guy to be a successful football manager. But he's got some interesting, forward-thinking, progressive ideas about how the game should be played. Let's hope we start to see that on Saturday, and certainly let's hope we start to see that in the run of three home games. It'll be difficult for Pools. It's another long journey for fans, players, management, and of course, long-suffering journalists as well. But it will be a chance for Limbrick to set his stall out, set the tone for what the next 18 months and potentially longer are going to look like. So let's hope the Pools can come out of it with a positive result.
Yeah, you've touched on the team selection now, which was going to be my next question about
Mm,
potentially who might play. I think we'll go through it sort of one by one. I mean,
yeah.
the goalkeeper's fairly obvious at this point because Joel Dixon isn't ready yet. That's another thing to mention as well about Brad Young being recalled back by Leicester
Mm,
as well. He unfortunately lost his place to Alan Smith and never recovered it again. But best of luck to him. And to be fair, Jacob or Jakob Stoller. Oh, that's another one
Stolarczyk,
I can't
yeah,
pronounce.
he's
Yeah, I'll say basically anyone who Leicester loans us apparently makes it into the first team within a year, so he may well do well out of that anyway. And Ben Kilp's another one actually to mention on the keeper's front. He's just moved to Portsmouth, which
yeah,
is very
interesting.
much fallen upwards from his point of view. He's done very well there. I mean, that must be one of the most surprising rises if you think about it, sort of from a player point of view in the last sort of 5 years or so. Like he went from a team that got relegated, he was relegated with us on the final day
Mm.
in League Two. He moved to Barnsley that summer, and now he's moved to Portsmouth in the
Yeah,
Championship. So he's done all right for himself there.
I think to be honest, Jack, he was unfairly criticised at times. I think you look at some of the goalkeeping problems Pools have had since Killip's departure. I mean, he played 150 times for Pools. Let's not forget he was a really integral part of the side that won promotion in 2021. Okay, he
Yep.
was a part of the side that got relegated, but I think you look at the issues that Pools had in the season that they went down in terms of the managerial appointments, in terms of the playing staff, in terms of the recruitment, in terms of the disconnect between the fans and the club. There were certainly bigger problems than Ben Killip. I understand his distribution wasn't always the best. He wasn't necessarily the most commanding. He's not the biggest goalkeeper. And perhaps I think he fell out with the fans almost, it felt like, towards the end of his time at Pools. Obviously produced that brilliant performance against Stockport on the final day of the season, which I think perhaps might have been a little bit of a little bit of an affront
A
to the fans.
showcase
Yeah,
almost.
exactly. And it, like you say, he's gone on and done well. Obviously, he started out as a backup at Barnsley, but broke into their team this season. I would imagine that he will be a cover and competition type goalkeeper for Portsmouth, and it's only a deal until the end of the season. They've obviously lost one of their goalkeepers. Will Norris has gone to Wickham, but nonetheless, good for him. And okay, he wasn't perfect during his time at Pools, but I think he was probably unfairly criticised, particularly toward the latter stages of his spell with us.
Certainly. I mean, you mentioned that performance of Stockport there. He deserves huge credit for that because, I mean, we were down at the time. Unfortunately, we were already gone. But, I mean, Stockport basically threw the kitchen sink at us. They still could have gone up, and I know they wouldn't have done with a victory because Northampton won and it was out of Stockport's hands in the end. But, I mean, down to the penalty save, he was basically a brick wall that day. He was excellent. And to be fair to him, he's done well ever since. We're going back to our lineup on Saturday, potentially. Adam Smith's virtually a lock. Do you think Dan Dodds will start a right back, or do you think he'll stick with Sharon?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I was a little bit surprised that Dodds lost his place. Sharon has been outstanding at right back. I think you could almost make a case that he's better suited to playing right back than he is midfield because, as we discussed, he does the destructive work so well, but he's not always the best with the ball at his feet. He was excellent again on Saturday. I wonder if Dan Dodds might come back in for two reasons. Dodds obviously gives you a little bit more in an attacking sense. He obviously he has been criticised perhaps for his work in the final third, sometimes takes a little bit too long, perhaps goes back inside or looks back rather than looks to drive into the box or deliver a cross. But we know that he can do that. He's obviously got really good athletic qualities. Perhaps he's just lacking a little bit of confidence and self-belief since returning from his injury. I think that he gives you more in an attacking sense than Sharon. And obviously Sharon has played an integral role in the midfield as well. I think if you look at the midfield options and what Limbrick might do. Maybe he might be tempted to play Featherstone and Miley as a two. I'd be surprised if we saw Featherstone and Campbell as a two again. But I wonder if Featherstone and Miley might be slightly too similar, and you might want to have Sharon alongside one or the other of those. Certainly a few selection headaches. I mean, and that's obviously not a bad thing. I'm thinking as I speak here about whether it will be Dodds and Sharon, and I do a predicted 11 on the Hartlepool Mail, which is wrong every week, so I'm certainly probably the wrong person to ask. Probably a toss up, to be honest, but I wonder if Limbrick, given that he's keen to set the tone for what's going to happen over his tenure, might be tempted to put Dan Dodds back in the side.
Yeah, I think the back two, sorry, the centre backs are fairly straightforward at this
Yep.
point. I think Waterfall and Parks are virtually a lock. You mentioned about Sharon potentially being player of the season. I would personally agree with that. I think he's been exceptional. But I think Tom Parks is very much a
Yeah.
contender for that as well. He's been
Close
outstanding.
second, I think.
Yeah, in the face of sort of, I wouldn't say chaos around him, but he sort of stood out, certainly in that back line. Ferguson's virtually a lock for left back as well, because there's not really too much to challenge him at this point, given that Bondswell has left. We've spoken about the midfield briefly, but I think if he does, do you think he will go for a 4-2-3-1,
Instinctively, I do. Yes.
given that that's his preference?
Yeah. I mean, we see managers at all levels try and they have one system that they have made that they've been successful with, and they try and play that system no matter what sort of players they've got. I'm thinking of Ruben Amorim at Manchester United at the minute.
Funnily enough, that was the first thing I thought as
Yeah,
well, because he's
exactly.
with
But
the
but Poole
history.
do have the players that can play a 4-2-3-1. I mean, Lenny Lawrence even said earlier on in his tenure that he wanted to train and work on Pools as though they were a 4-2-3-1 side. So I think that's probably what we're going to see, given that it is tended to be Limbrick's preference. I would think if you put Dodds back in, then it'll be Sharon and one of Featherstone or Miley. I think you could make a strong case for either of those players to start. Obviously, Featherstone's been really impressive this season, as you said, has got great experience. Miley's had a really promising start to his Pools career as well. If Sharon remains at right back, then you've got another decision to make. You could go with both of them. Do you then lack a ball winner in midfield? I know Hunter and Sloggett probably haven't lived up to expectations so far, and I'd be surprised if we saw either of those from the start on Saturday. But again, it's good to have competition for places. It's good to have selection headaches. I would suggest it'll be Sharon and one of Featherstone or Manley. So I'm going to give you one name and then sit on the fence for the other.
Fair enough. I mean, you've mentioned there about competition for places, just on a different subject. It's probably important if we are going to sign anyone else. I think left back is maybe the
Yeah.
point, because at the minute, he doesn't have any competition, David Ferguson, and I don't think Bondswell. Well, clearly Bondswell didn't challenge him enough because he never really played. I mean, there was a lot of rotation, as we've stated, in other positions, but in terms of the left back position, David Ferguson's had it nailed down virtually, and he did come into a run of form, to be fair to him, so he was worthy of it, but we never really saw much of the backup, so that'd be a good place to start. Is there a potential for Marley potentially to play as the 10 rather than in the midfield?
He certainly could. It's a good point. I think that having spoken to him a couple of times, we spoke to him on Friday, the day after he signed, and then we spoke to him on Saturday as well after he'd scored his goal. He describes himself as a number six. I think for a young player who's just making the transition to senior football, I personally would prefer to see him played in his favoured position. I think Adam Campbell, who arrived with really a lot of expectation on his shoulders, didn't he? Given that what he'd achieved with Crawley, scored I think 7 goals in 40 odd games for them, was a regular as they won promotion to League One, started in the playoff final. There was a lot of expectation on what he was going to produce. He's obviously done really well at this level before. It hasn't necessarily happened in an attacking sense, but he does do a lot of good work out of possession. I know people might say, well, it's not enough given that he's an attacking player just to do good work out of possession, but he doesn't lead the press. I was watching Martin Odegaard for Arsenal against Man City, and by no means am I comparing the two players, but he does a really similar role in terms of how he leads the press, and that is so important. You take Odegaard out the side, Arsenal don't look the same team, and I think potentially with Campbell, you take him out the side. Pools don't look quite the same team. They certainly don't look as purposeful out of possession. And I think when you consider that you're going to a side like Sutton, who will look to assert themselves on the game and have plenty of the ball, I think that I would have Campbell in the 10 role again. And if you're going to play Manley, I think play him as a six.
Yeah, I mean, you've spoken before about getting into trouble with new signings for basically calling them over the hill, etc., etc. I think comparing Adam Campbell to Martin Odegaard might get you some brownie points back.
I'll play this podcast to him. We're in tomorrow on Thursday. We're in Maiden Castle for the for the press, and I will be sure to play this out to him,
Yes,
Jack. So
absolutely.
he'll have to sit down for a long interview as a repayment. But yeah, I'm sure he'll be delighted with that. But you know what I mean in terms of his work out of possession. I
Certainly,
think
yeah, yeah. Work
he
ethic
gives
is
Paul
very
something
good.
that no one else probably in the squad does. But I would equally say he needs to do more in the final third. I think only 3 goals, couple of assists. You need more from someone like him at this level.
Certainly, and just looking at the front, oh well, if it's a 4-2-3-1, we're looking at the two wide and then the one up front. We'll start with the two out wide. Cleary, a lock,
Yeah,
pretty much.
Cleary and Charman for me. I think
Mm.
Cleary has been good. He certainly was good on Saturday. Caused plenty of problems for the fullback and showed some good signs against Barnet as well. I think he was probably the best attacking outlet. Obviously hit the bar on his debut as well. That goal feels like it's coming. Obviously he'll be wanting to get off the mark sooner rather than later. He does a lot of good work. I think he certainly deserves his place in the side. Folarin is obviously putting pressure on Luke Charman on the other side. I really like Luke Charman. I know he has slightly divided opinion. Another one who you'd probably like more goals from. I think only 3 goals this season as well. But I think he's got a unique profile for a winger because he's big and powerful. Again, he does some good work out of possession. He's always sure to occupy his fullback. He likes to run at defenders. He's not afraid of that. When he gets going, he's really difficult to stop. I've been really impressed by Charman this season. I think he's been one of the better performers, and I would like to see him continue in the side because, again, I think his unique profile means he's one of those that gives Poole something that probably none of the other wingers can or will. Folarin, his time will come. I think he probably hasn't shown enough yet in what we've seen of him that he's absolutely deserving of a start. Obviously, we don't see them week in, week out in training, but I think Charman will be the man to get the nod there.
Yeah, Charman's a strange one because I don't think he started particularly well. I don't think he was poor by any means, but I don't think his output was what we expected when he first came in. But he got the hat trick of assists against Solihull, and I think he got injured for a little while after that. But he's come back and he's been fairly consistent. I do think it's difficult for following, even with the fanfare that he's had from the fans. He's a permanent sign and everyone's excited. I think it's difficult to argue that Charman should be dropped potentially um, given the performances that he's put in since he came back from injury. And Cleary, as you mentioned, he's made the impact as he's come in, and I think it's very difficult to suggest anyone else there, especially with Joe Gray still being out. And up front, it's a well, I mean, you could say it's a coin toss, but it's one of two, isn't it? Is it is it safe to say that Manny D will start, or do you think perhaps that Medine will? Because Medine has been in the better goal scoring form of the two since sort of mid-December time. So which way's your head leaning there?
It's a difficult one, isn't it, Jack? It's
Yeah.
times like this. I'm glad that I'm not the Pools manager, as I'm sure everyone else that follows Pools will be delighted after listening to me drone on for an hour here. I think Medina, as you say, is in the better goal scoring form. I think he was good on Saturday, although he didn't score. He linked the play really well. He looks fit. He looks sharp. He obviously has had plenty of problems with injury over the last 24 months, and obviously had that groin strain that kept him out of the game against Woking, but he's got that striker's instinct. His movement is excellent. You can see why he's scored so many goals at a much higher level because he just has a habit of being in exactly the right place at the right time. Probably something that Manny Disarue doesn't quite have. I think there are times when you watch him and you just wish he was somewhere else in the box more often. And in part that's because of the way Pools play, but in part I think Medine has that movement that he's honed to such a fine art over so many years. As you say, his goal scoring form has been good, 6 goals in his last 8 games. Compare that to Manny Diu, I think's got one in his last 10, one in his last 11, and none in his last 6. But what Manny Disarui does give you is he's so dynamic, he's so athletic. One of the things Lenny Lawrence said in his YouTube interview when he was announcing the switch with him and Limbrick is he's so good at defending set pieces. But then you're thinking, well, do you want to have a striker in your side who is enduring a bit of a goal drought just because he's good at defending set pieces? And of course, the answer probably would be no. But I think Disarue does give you a lot in terms of his all-round play. He holds the ball up well. Again, he occupies defenders. He links play. He is athletic. He's capable of running with the ball, running in behind defenders. So he's probably more dynamic than Medine. But Medine does a lot of the things that Disarue can do as well, and he's got more goals. So it's a difficult decision. Instinctively, I would suggest Disarue. I think Disarue is really a player that Limbrick will like. I'm sure Medina is a player that Limbrick certainly will like as well. But it, as you say, it basically could go either way. Disarrui's all-round game perhaps might give him the edge, but Medina's goal-scoring form might be the reason that he gets the nod. So I'll leave that one up to Anthony, I have to say.
Fair enough. And to be fair, you've sat on the fence for a few of those, and I will let you off of those, but I will have to ask you for a score prediction now.
I am gonna go for 2-2. I think a point would be a good result for Pools. Pools obviously haven't scored many goals of late. They've only got three in their last four. That's been pretty disappointing. Although they have posed a reasonable goal threat, especially with the new additions. I think if there's one thing that Limbrick can do, having taken over, having replaced Lenny Lawrence, although I think his title is still going to be head coach, but he's obviously the main man. Now, if there's one thing he can do in a week to 10 days since the change has been made, it's changed how Pool's approach. He's obviously not going to be able to change exactly he's not going to be able to change the style of play overnight, as it were. That's going to take time, but he can change how Pool's approach the game. I think they can get a little bit more on the front foot. They can try and take the game to Sutton because they've got lots of good attacking players. We've been talking about them over the last hour. They've got a goal threat, but they need to better utilize that. And I think that that's something that Limbrick will be really keen to do because it's important when you have a change that you do see a change in terms of how pools are doing things. You don't want to see necessarily Limbrick rip up Lenny Lawrence's entire rule book because there have been a lot of positive changes under Lenny Lawrence as well. But I think he'll be keen to make his own mark, put his own stamp on the side. And with that in mind, I think we'll potentially see a more aggressive attacking approach from Pools. And that will probably lend itself to goals because Pools at times have looked a little bit vulnerable defensively. I felt they looked vulnerable defensively on Saturday, actually, particularly from the flanks. So I think there'll be goals in the game. Sutton like to attack. Pools haven't always liked to attack, but let's hope under Anthony Limbrick that we will see them a little bit more positive than perhaps we have in recent weeks. So I'm going to go for 2-2. And if you said to me now Pools would get a point, I know I've already bemoaned the number of draws that they've had, but I'd bite your hand off for that, to be honest.
I think a lot of people probably would take a point. It's a difficult place to go. It's good that they've got rid of that artificial pitch now because we can't play on artificial pitches. But it's it's a difficult place to go, and with our bad record there, I mean, to be fair, if we need a tactic in reserve, just drop Manny D and bring him off the bench because apparently that works against Sutton, and he'll come on and score on an
Yeah,
hat
very
trick,
true. Very
and
true.
that'd
I'm
be
not sure he'd be
excellent.
best pleased though, but
I don't think he will, but if he comes on and proves a point, then I don't think anyone will complain there. Thank you very much, Roy, for joining me this week.
thank
It's
you.
been a busy week for Pulls, and hopefully we'll cap it off with a nice result on Saturday, and then obviously it'll be a busy week after that as well with the three home games in a week. And I'm sure we'll see you, or to be fair, we'll hear you more accurately on Radio Tees on Saturday. Is that right?
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. I always enjoy
Oh, they
doing
haven't
it.
invited you yet, have they? Is that a last
Well,
minute?
not yet, not yet, but I'll hopefully be seeing a couple of the gents tomorrow. And obviously, if they don't invite me on, then I'll kick up a massive fuss. So hopefully, I'll manage to force my way in anyway.
Fair enough. And if anyone's not traveling down, then obviously tune into Radio Tees and Robbie will be there. Thank you very much, Robbie, and hopefully all goes well on Saturday.
Thanks very much.